minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fine, let me begin with you and just try to get some clarification. According to the testimony that we've been given, the DOD IG automatically closes a case within 10 days. Is that not right?
That is not right. What the issue is if we are trying to get in touch with the complainant and the complainant drops off the screen and we can't get in touch with them, we've tried several times, again and again, finally we'll send them a letter, a 10-day letter, and say, if you don't get back to us, we're going to close the case. We issued one 27 times in 4 years, 27 times in 4 years, and in those cases, 8 of them responded, and we continue with the case, and the others never responded, and we close the case. It is a prudent management tool. If after a long period of time the complainants do not contact you, do not respond to your calls, it's important to close that case if they're not willing to go forward. And
so how long do they have before they get the 10-day letter?
They have at least several times where we contact them repeatedly and ask them to get in touch with us, and if they persistently do not get back to us, not in a short period of time, but over extended period of time, we'll eventually send a letter saying, look, if you don't get back to us, we're going to close
so
the
what
case.
kind of time do you give them before, in between letters? In other words, if someone is deployed, if
Yes.
someone's engaged, but what?
We absolutely are aware of that and give them time and give them, I can't give you an exact figure, but our investigators know to give them significant time, and it's only when they repeatedly won't get back to us.
So you don't have a policy as to how, so who determines how frequently you try to reach out to them?
Well, we're constantly reaching out to them because without them, we can't go
All right,
forward.
constantly, what does that mean? I'm trying to wrap my mind around this. My understanding was 10 days. You're saying 10 days is the final.
It's the final
after,
thing, exactly.
After multiple previous
Exactly.
attempts. So what's the time frame in which these attempts are made?
I can't give you a specific number. I don't have a metric, but I believe it's months.
Okay.
And if somebody then says, I was deployed, we will reopen that case. That's not an issue.
Ms. Atkinson, do you believe there's room for improvement on this, just what appears to me a rather nebulous policy?
We did not specifically look at that, but I will tell you that in our ongoing work looking at civilians and contractors, we are going to be looking at dismissals and substantiation rates, and so we may have more insight into that.
Okay, let's go back, Mr. Fine, to you again. Came up a moment ago about standardization. Where are we in that process?
Well, we are working with the service IGs to try and implement standardized processes. They all, not all, but some of them do it different ways. Preliminary investigations, how they do things. We believe it's appropriate to have a standardized process that will allow us to do things in a timely way and in a standardized way. Having said that, the recommendation from GAO was to have the Secretary of Defense issue directive to ensure that that happens, and in some sense that's the only way it will happen, and we're willing to work with the Secretary of Defense to try and pursue standardization. That will take time, as you probably know. Getting a directive in the Department of Defense is not an easy thing, but in the interim we are trying to voluntarily get them to standardized processes. And we have a working group set up where we meet with them and try and implement that.
Do you think it'll happen?
I hope so. I think so.
Ms. Atkinson?
We certainly hope so. We think that's a key recommendation, and they have been working with a working group, and they did change the guide, but the guide, again, is best practices, and we do believe it should be directed.
Do you believe we can make that happen?
I hope that they can.
Okay. All right, so you have multiple attempts to reach out to these service members. Right now, the reprisal investigation is, it was 526 days now. That's been shortened.
Right.
But technically, the statute says 180 days.
Well, the statute says if you don't complete it in 180 days, you have to notify them that it's not completed and about the delay. So it doesn't require you to complete it within 180 days. Having said that, we do agree it should be shortened. We are seeking to shorten it. In fiscal year, I think 2014, it was over 500 days. In fiscal year 2015, it was 300 days for our investigations. That's still too long. We're trying to shorten it.
So there's no consequences except to the service person for this going far beyond 180 days. And you can continue to prolong it so long as you keep notifying. There's no dead end to this thing.
We don't. Yes, we attempt to do this as quickly as possible. The consequences are we're held accountable in these kinds of hearings. And I would say this, too. I wrote it in my written statement. You know, there is a burgeoning caseload in whistleblowers. It is dramatically increased. We have not dramatically increased our resources. We are doing more with less. I believe as an IG, we ought to be commensurate with the Department of Defense. If they grow, we ought to grow. If they're stable, we ought to be stable. If they're constricted, we ought to constrict. If you look at the last 20 years, the Department of Defense has grown dramatically. We haven't. If we had simply kept pace with them, we would have 500 more employees. We would be able to do these with more resources rather than giving our investigators lots and lots of cases to work on. And I think that would inure to everybody's benefit. Everybody's.
Mr. Chairman, my time's expired, and I appreciate that, but it seems to me that the servicemen and women are suffering the longer this goes on. They are the only ones suffering. Everyone else gets a pass, but they are the ones that take a kick in the gut. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.